Greetings. Welcome to the inaugural Elm City Lit Fest 2020. Elm City Lit Fest is a celebration of literary arts and literary artists of the African diaspora. I'm Ife Michelle Gardine. I am the founder, creator of the Elm City Lit Fest, and this is our inaugural celebration. I'm so happy today to be hosting this segment of the Lit Fest. Is Black Lives Matter, Black Voices and Comics and Graphic Novels. Today we have Miss Micheline Hess.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Hello. Going to go with the female first.
Yes.
And then we have Mr. Alex Simmons.
Hey there, everybody.
And Jerry Kraft. Don Gagnon.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
And we hope to get Bill Foster. We hope Bill Foster can join us soon. He may be having some technical difficulties. That's okay. I'm going to read everybody's bio. After I read your bio, then I'm going to ask you to just talk about how you got started. Okay, Micheline. Was born and raised in New York City, and spends her spare time developing graphic novels, short stories, interactive iBooks for kids. She has always been fascinated by the visual narrative in books, film, and constantly endeavoring to weave her own sense of humorous storytelling into both her personal and sometimes professional work. And she still lives in New York City. So Micheline, tell us a little bit about your beginnings in this and journey.
My journey actually started a long time ago. After I graduated college, I really had no idea where I was going in life. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I don't even think the internet was much of a thing at that point. And I was working retail, much to my mother's chagrin. One day, I think she told me, or someone, I found out that Milestone Comics was looking for colorists and other artists to join their team. So I quit my job pretty much that day, which I don't recommend that people do, but that's what happened. And I put together a portfolio and camped out there until I got a job. And I was working under Jason Scott Jones. And I learned how to color some really amazing titles like Icon and Shadow Cabinet and some others, Rocket, Static. And then when the doors closed at Milestone, I was left kind of lost again. I actually ended up right back where I was in retail. And it wasn't until several years later, I was working as a designer at Nickelodeon. And I got to a point where I kind of felt the passage of time. I guess maybe as you get older, that starts to become more noticeable. And I didn't want to get to a point where my eyesight was so bad or my hands were so arthritic that I was saying, I could be a great comic book artist. And someone's like, that's nice, Miss Hess, take your medication. So I decided to go in, and that's when I started my first issue of Malice in Ovenland. It was drawing ink and paper, and it was followed up by 4 more issues, which became a trade paperback that was published under Rosarium Publishing. And since then, I've gone on to create other books that star the Malice in Ovenland crew, as well as my most recent piece, Diary of a Mad Black Werewolf. And that's where we are today.
Wow. And I see you have some lovely graphics behind you.
Yes, always.
We'll get into the whole, all that technical stuff afterwards. And Alex Simmons, you're next.
Oh.
Blackjack Adventures. He is a freelance writer, comic book creator, and screenplays, as well as playwright, teaching artist, and creative consultant. He's written for Disney Books, Penguin Press, Simon & Schuster, DC Comics, and Archie Comics. Simmons is a creator of acclaimed adventure comic book series Blackjack. He has also helped develop concepts and scripts for an animation studio in England. As a teaching artist, Simmons has created and taught creative arts workshops for students and educators across the U.S., West Indies, Africa, and Europe. You covered the world, bruh.
Yeah, I'm a little tired, but I'm going to go out again later.
So tell us a little bit about how you started.
I was one of those kids who didn't have any trouble with my imagination. My mother did, my teachers did, but not me. I was always full of ideas. I loved to draw when I was a kid. I loved to create stories, make up stories. I had action figures, not dolls. I had action figures. And I was constantly setting up these scenarios and just really having a good time imagining worlds, creating worlds. But when I was growing up, there were really Black characters in terms of television, comics, film. We were either subservience or the joke of the storyline or not there at all. So I can't say that as a young person, I consciously thought about it that way. I just knew that I saw heroic figures. I saw a lot of, fun characters and adventurous things that I wanted to do. And I just said in my head, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. As I started, into my teen years and we were going through the civil rights movement and I'm becoming more aware of what Blacks had actually done, I didn't see that as, okay, now I'm angry because I never got to do that. I saw that as, okay, there's a lot of stories that haven't been told from our past that I definitely want to pull forward. I still want to, I still enjoy that heroic figure, the globe trotting or solving mysteries or whatever, but just going to take that and I'm going to meld the two. I'm either going to create Black characters doing some of those things, or I'm going to pursue writing for some of those characters that I grew up reading. So writing Sherlock Holmes play, an original play, was one of the first things I did where I melded those things together. And so I took a Sherlock Holmes story and I melded it with the actual history of a Black actor from the 1800s named Ira Aldridge and his family. And I melded those two elements together and created a Sherlock Holmes play called Sherlock Holmes in the Hands of Othello, which actually got produced off Broadway, and we received some awards and it was published. And that began to solidify my love of fiction writing, extreme characters, fantasy characters, but also bringing in as much of the truth, either ignored history or putting in more characters of color, trying to be more respectful of that. And subsequently, this character over this shoulder is the Blackjack character. It's one of the covers from one of my early books. And so I had a lot of success with that in terms of building a fan base. And I've just continued with that. Writing for Archie was fun. I got to do a lot of their characters, iconic characters, not all of them just Black. There's a thing about, and I'm going to be quiet in a moment. There's a thing about in the 80s in particular where Black writers and artists were usually hired when a Black character was showing up in a mainstream book or a project. I felt that there was no reason why we shouldn't be able to write anything. As long as we did our homework, as long as we represented ourselves correctly and others correctly, we should be able to write anything. So pursuing writing Batman, which I did, but I brought a Black character into that. I was asked to specifically. Writing Archie and working with Chuck Clayton, one of their primo Black characters, but also writing about the Archie gang, doing books like I wrote the Black Panther psychology book. I co-edited that, and I also wrote a couple of articles in there. But that was another moment of where connecting with a Black iconic character and bringing that forward, but also looking at is how it affected the world in general. People who are not necessarily of color, but still love the character and the power that had. These are the things that I've become very interested in basically showing how we are not only a part of the world, but we influence the world in a positive way. And I want to see more of that out there.
So, man, that sounds like a way out of no way.
Well,
Jerry.
It's definitely one of the things that I'm very committed to.
So Jerry Craft. And for those people that are local to us in New Haven, Jerry Craft did do some comics at one time in the inner city newspaper for a while. And Jerry Craft is New York Times bestselling Newbery Medal award-winning author and graphic novel New Kid. For the graphic novel New Kid. His second novel, Class Act, is publishing October 6th, 2020. He's also the creator of Mama's Boys. I remember that. An award-winning comic strip series which won the African American Literary Award 5 times. He's co-founder of the Schomburg Center's annual Black Comic Book Festival. And he received a BFA from the School of Visual Arts. So Jerry, share with us a little bit about your beginnings.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. So, a lot of what Alex says rings true to me. When I was coming, when I was coming up, I wasn't a reader. I read Marvel comics, and even then, the black superheroes were not really the same as they are today. I couldn't relate to a lot of them, and we were sidekicks. When we came to a lot of things with like more serious literature, I felt like a lot of the characters that looked like me were either runaway slaves or during the civil rights era or police brutality or gangs or something like that. And not that those aren't important stories, but I also think that there are stories. Am I boring you? Really? There are stories like even just having someone like a Fat Albert, was really important because, it didn't matter what race, nationality, male, female, everyone my age watched Fat Albert and talked about it on Monday morning at school. And when you think about it, there really hasn't been anything to replace that in like 50 years. There has not really been those kind of iconic black characters or even characters that white kids look at, and that was why I thought that the Black Panther movie was so amazing, because for the first time ever, you had white kids saying, "Mom, I want to be Black Panther," which I think goes a long way to healing a lot of stuff that, a lot of the woes that society that we get caught up on. So my goal was always to kind of make these iconic black characters that I hope would cross over, that would really help and benefit African American kids, but would also be kind of like a bridge, where they could really look at us as those books as mirrors. And it was not easy, I ended up always getting rejected. So it wasn't until I think 1997 when I self-published my first Mama's Boys book. And I did that. And then 10 years later, I self-published another one. And then people came to me that they were like, "Oh, I can't get my book published either. Can you help me publish my book?" And so that's what I did over 20 years of just helping other people publish their books, other African American authors publish their books. So I ended up making a career out of, not being able to do a lot of the stuff on my own. And it was inspirational seeing people like Maury Turner or Alex Simmons. You see, I've got his picture up here. I've been reading Alex's stuff since I was, toddler, basically. So he's always been a hero of mine. And then when I started to self-publish, in 2014, I got a break. I got to do illustrated book for Scholastic called The 0 Degree Zombie Zone. And then in 2017, I was able to sign with HarperCollins. And this is the first traditionally published book that I was able to illustrate and write, which is amazing. And it just goes to show, I mean, having won, it's the first graphic novel to win the Newbery, won the Kirkus Prize, won the Curtis Scott King Author Award, that we can tell regular stories, that are both commercially successful and critically acclaimed if you give us the chance. There are so many door gatekeepers that kept that shut for so long. And I love the fact that, having seen this, I have friends who are authors and illustrators now saying that they've been approached by publishers saying, "Hey, can we, do you have a story for us?" Because they have seen the success of New Kid. And then this one, the sequel, or the companion book, publishes October 6th, which is in about 10 days or so. So it's been a long, like 40-year career to be an overnight success, as people put it. So I'm just, just grateful to be here. So thank you.
Gagnon. Let's hear. You're up next, and you have a dual appointment as a professor of English and professor of theater arts at Western Connecticut.
Mhm.
Originally from Boston, you have a BA in journalism and MA in writing and PhD in English, all in Florida. Winner of the Provost Award for outstanding teaching at his university. His specialties include African American and Latinx literatures, as well as LGBTQ lit and drama. He comes to this discussion by way of his childhood interest in comics and his adulthood discovery of graphic novels and interest in Afrofuturism that blew up as the Black Panther movie opened, and was delighted to have Bill Foster invite him to become a part of this, as a part of a group including authorities from the Schomburg Center and Black Culture. Oh, so you and Bill have collaborated a few times, I see.
Yes, we have a couple of times already, and delightfully so. So I was very, very pleased to be invited here, especially since this is a case of which one of these is not like the other, right? Here with these esteemed insiders and respected creators, I'm the one who comes to the material from the outside, and part of how I view my position as a professor of literature, of course, is to bring literature to students in ways that they can then just take it and bring it into their lives, and therefore bring it into the world, so that the literature does what literature does do, and that is to expand understanding, and we hope, of course, expand empathy. So yeah, so I'm delighted to be here. In terms of, the introduction, I come to these things as a lot of people do, I think, with a childhood interest in comics, though in a very small, very white town in New Hampshire after Boston, where my nickname was the unoriginal, but I suppose appropriate, Puerto Rico. Meant that Black Lightning perhaps was, rather than Black Panther, was my introduction to heroes of color in any significant way. The fact that Black Lightning showed up in somewhat bowdlerized form as Black Vulcan, short pants and everything, on the Super Friends cartoon on Saturday morning, made him loom even larger. And to this day, I've actually retained my entire original run collection of Black Lightning, though I sold off my five first printing first issues of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Which should say something about how I responded to Jefferson Pierce, and also why I did not need to take out any student loans in college. But from there, my interest expanded as the number of non-white characters, especially in Marvel comics, though I didn't have much access to Marvel where I grew up. So the ones that started to catch my eye were Captain Marvel, the Monica Rambeau Captain Marvel, of course. I don't know if it was that fabulous hair or whether it was her shiny costume, but something drew me to her. Luke Cage, from when he first showed up in the Defenders. Mel Duncan, of course, the very model of corporate marginalization at DC. Cyborg, of course, because I came of age as the new Teen Titans were making a splash at DC. And if you promise not to make any inappropriate noises, Vibe, from that short-lived version of the Justice League, before he and his accent were sent to a timely death, though I was glad to see that he made a comeback, of course, in the current TV series of The Flash as a cool character rather than as a humiliating one. However, regarding mature Black novels, if collections of Magruder's Boondocks don't actually count as graphic novels, I suppose it was Matt Johnson's Incognegro that really drew me to the form, because as we were chatting about earlier, Ife, I started to realize very quickly how many additional options there were for expanding a student's understanding of narrative and narrative storytelling when you have the visuals as well as simply the text, right, or the standard written text, and that's really where my interest started to develop there, and became, again, part of my mission, not only to explore new ways to tell stories, or the way that these authors were telling stories, but especially to kind of broaden an understanding of what counts as literature, further ways to deconstruct the canon from the canon that we have come to know, that is, of course, the kind of cis heteropatriarchal Europeanized understanding of what makes good literature. And I think graphic novels are one of the most student appreciated structures in deconstructing that long-standing model.
Okay, and the lit in Lit Fest is for literacy. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this panel and have this discussion is because traditionally in the African American community, literacy has been a topic that like something that we really need to get on stay on top of, and in this time of like, since cell phones have been out and everybody's texting and they got text language and things like that. I know a few when Jerry, when your first book came out, I forgot the name of the book, but I bought that book actually, and I forgot the name of it, for a lot of young men that I knew, to get them on to gaining their literacy. So I want to know, for you all, for teaching or as you throughout your careers, how has your writing or your books, how have they affected or what have you seen? How have you seen them affect young people? And I'll start with Micheline again, if that makes sense.
What's interesting is initially, when I first, one of the other comics I put out with was a comic called the Anansi Kids Club and the All Saints Day Adventure, which takes place in the West Indies in the Isle of St. Vincent, where my mother grew up. And it was funny to notice that it was often adults at conventions who saw it first. And they were like, oh, this is this. And, oh, I recognize that. And why are you talking about breadfruit? And they hand it to the kid. And the kid's like, what's this? And so in the back of that comic, there's a little simple glossary that explains some of the different terms and some of the different fruits and vegetables and places on the island. And there's also a bit that I put back there, which of course I conveniently can't show right now, but it talks about the history of the sugar mill, because the antagonist in that story she's kind of like a witch character who lives in a converted sugar mill. So it talks about the history of the sugar mill and what part that played, and what enslaved African people had to deal with in terms of the risks and things like that, and why it was built and who built it. So it was good to know that kind of that message was getting out, because since that was one of the first comics I ever made, I kind of felt in a lot of ways like I was putting a message in a bottle and just kind of hurling it out into the ocean. And I wasn't really sure if it was going to connect with anybody. Since then, and since the creation of the Malice in Ovenland trade paperback, I've gotten so many messages from parents who say, I bought this for my kid. I wasn't sure if he or she was going to like it, but they took it and they ran all the way to the far corner of the playground and they sat there and they were quiet for 2 hours. You don't understand how amazing this is. And I was like, wow. So it's also very affirming for me, not just as a person who enjoys writing, but to know that the compilation of my writing and my thoughts and my concepts, my characters, and the art are actually resonating with my audience. And that was something, a fear of failure I was having around that really held me up for a lot of years. So in this way, I never really thought about reaching kids with reading and saying, oh, they'll enjoy reading this. But from hearing from the librarian and the student and the teacher side and coming in to talk to kids about the process and seeing the way their eyes light up, it's actually hitting different points that I never anticipated I would hit, and feel really good, because at the time that I started, I just kind of wanted to create something that I wanted to see and that the kid me wanted to see as well, because the comics I usually saw as a kid were Wendy the Witch and Casper the Friendly Ghost, and my brother would buy like Sergeant Rock and Lobo, and there were cool stories, but there were never any characters that looked like me or really had backstories and things that really resonated with me.
Thank you for that. Jerry, let's hear a little from you on that top. Yes, Jerry. You're on mute.
Okay, so I said I wanted to actually interrupt myself for a second and say something about Alex Simmons. When I first nice, Alex. Read his book Blackjack, I felt like I was you know, an 8-year-old kid reading it and not being able to get up until the book was done. And I think one of the reasons why he and I have become friends is his commitment to not only telling good stories, but telling important stories, and also having a teaching component. And I think that he and I grew up in a similar era where everything seemed to have like a teaching component to it. Like it was important, like when I mentioned Fred Albert before, there was always like a morality or this, or, you know, literacy or something like that. And to see what he has done, even globally, you know, with his Kids Comic Con and then traveling internationally for things is just like really commendable. So I wanted to say that to you, Alex.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you.
Okay. So would you like to go and finish
Say
up
nice
on
things
that?
about you now?
No, absolutely.
Okay, I'm sorry, that threw me, Jerry. So I'll be back in a second here. I think it's kind of important to me anyway. It's one of the things that's fueled me over the years. Is I think I said earlier that growing up, I don't remember consciously saying there's nobody that looks like me until the 60s. You know, I literally, you watch what you watched. You watch television, you watch the movies, I didn't question certain things. I just enjoyed certain things. And I didn't consciously feel like I was left out. And the one conscious thing about race in terms of heroes on the screen that I remember thinking was important was my character, not my character, but the characters that I like, was the Lone Ranger and Tonto. For some reason, it was important to me that these two men who were different races and different cultures were like brothers. They were attached at the hip. You theoretically, within the stories that I was watching, if you wanted to hurt one, you had to hurt the other. They were always together. And even in one of the movies they did at that time, I will risk my life to save his. And that to me, I didn't see that on television, and I didn't think about it like that with anything else until I Spy with Robert Culp and Bill Cosby. Those two teens were the only reflections I had of men of a different race working with whites on a somewhat, note I say somewhat, equal basis. They could have adventures. They could globetrot. They could do these things. So that meant maybe I could. And I wasn't going to be the guy carrying the luggage and stuff like that. I wasn't going to be the porter. And in particular, I wasn't going to be the comedic relief in a Charlie Chan movie. That I really could have power in a situation. I could be the hero. And when I started to see that as a teenager and really start to think about that and then eventually pursue acting, it was important that I realized how the kid in me came to these moments of awareness, of then looking at Batman and looking at Superman and looking at the Marvel characters and why did I like this and where were we missing from that? And it just sort of culminated in the thought of maybe we weren't included before, but there's no reason we can't be now. There's no reason that I shouldn't be telling stories that we are involved in. And it became, I didn't think of it as a mission. It just became the real. This is who I am. This is what I will do. And it's important that kids, wherever I was, whether I was speaking to them or sharing the books that I wrote with them, that they realize you can do this too. You can have a voice. You can tell your stories. Your fantasies and your imagination are valid. And I've often said that if a child cannot imagine him or herself in the future becoming something, a doctor, an astronaut, or I don't know, a magician, whatever, if they can't really say, one day I could be, then they lose the motivation and the impetus for learning right now, for gaining knowledge and saying, yeah, I'm going to take this and I'm going to become that. They give up on themselves. And that was not going to be anything that was going to happen easily on my watch. So everything I write does have a little bit of a learning experience in it, a moral or some sort of ethical remark. Even the Archie things that I did, you know, there's no arena where you can't hopefully say a little something in the subtext or through the character development that says you can, you should, there is a right and a wrong. We do matter. We were there. We still are. And we're going to be in the future as well.
But Alex, like me, did you grow up realizing that, you know, when we're watching movies like Zulu, that we were rooting for the English soldiers, and watching, you know, Custer, that we're rooting for the cavalry and not
the first time I had that thought was I was watching, it was a Saturday afternoon. It's on Channel 5 in New York, and I'm watching a Tarzan movie with Johnny Weissmuller, and I'm realizing that the natives who were born and raised in Africa generation after generation were afraid of most of the animals. And I went, that does not make sense. I'm sorry, it's the same town, you know, if you want to look at it that way. It's the same city, it's their environment. Why are they afraid of everything around them, including him? I remember that going, what? And I'm sitting back there watching this movie, and he's on top of an elephant, you know, sending out the call, which I could do at that time. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, how come he can talk to him? And what? And that was it. Now I turned it into a series of what ifs, why, jokes, things like that. But in my mind, I'm going, this makes no kind of sense. And I got to figure this out. And yes, after that, you start looking at, well, wait a minute, you told the Indians they could live peacefully in this place, but then you wiped them out. Why am I cheering when they attacked the wagon? Because you just dissed them completely. You know, you start to ask this question, like, why am I in favor of, there's more to this story. And the last thing I'll say is what I think is particularly disturbing today is Blackjack is a character that takes place, the stories take place in 1930s. So a lot of what I do is research the 30s, and a lot of the adventures and things I pull in, and a lot of the actual history I pull in. I lived through the civil rights movement. There was a lot of awareness of what blacks accomplished all through the 60s and 70s and 80s. Okay. It wasn't until 4 weeks ago, that I became aware of the fact, even though I'd been planning to write a Blackjack story for 10 years about the 1936 Olympics and Jesse Owens and the other black man I knew that had been there. It wasn't until 3 weeks ago that I learned that there had been 18 black participants in the 1936 Olympics. 16 men and 2 women. And that the 2 women had been in the 1932 Olympics. And that they had won some of their meets, but had not been allowed to go out onto the field to receive their medals. And I'm saying to myself, and I consider myself reasonably intelligent, I've done research. I lived through the awareness era of the 60s and 70s. There's the internet. There's all this stuff. How could I not have known? And then when you read, I bought the book that speaks of this. I have the documentary that speaks of this, which is, if I can reach it before we're over, I'll send you guys the information. I think it's Olympic Dreams, American Prejudice. I think that's the title of the book. And it's written by a sister named Travis Thrasher is one. Trying to remember the name of the other author. Oh, please don't do this to me. Anyway, I'll pull it together. But the bottom line is the book and the documentary specifically state how during that time we had black newspapers commenting on the fact that there were blacks in trying out for the Olympics, and then the blacks actually made it. And I'm thinking, where's all that chronicle? How can I be in 2020 and not have known this before that? So it becomes even more important that we put these images out, that we reevaluate how we look at things. And again, I just unashamedly say, I don't come from anger 90% of the time, but I understand what's wrong is wrong. And so my energy goes into what can I do to change that?
And, you know, that's one of the problems that I have is that, you know, now I've appreciated every accolade that I've received, but when people talk about what a special book New Kid is, you know, and how different it is, I thank them, but I say, you know, at the same time, it's sad that in 2020, it's seen as groundbreaking. It's literally, you know, an African-American boy from Washington Heights going to a private school.
And it should be the norm by now.
There should be, 50-60 books like that, you know, of just us, you know, here we are going to private school, here we are going here we are doing this, here we are doing that. And again, I appreciate it, but, you know, like when, again, I wasn't a reader, my kids were readers, but you don't realize what it's like to watch them reading, you know, starting with, say, a Captain Underpants, you know, and then they pretend they're Captain Underpants, and they pretend that they're Wimpy Kid, and they pretend that they're this. Just like, you know, back in the day, my thing was like, you know, I grew up with Partridge Family and Brady Bunch, and that was what we thought teen life was like. You know?
I was Leave It to Beaver.
Right.
What do I do with that?
Right. So it is such a thing that even now, you know, you don't see a lot of white families buying Black books. If they do, they're more the, you know, the historical, like here you should read about Martin Luther King, which is amazing and it's great. But look at what the Black Panther movie did for adults. You know, we were the ones dressing up, you know, going to see the movie. Like, we just lost our minds because even 30 years old, 40, 50, 60, it's like, oh my goodness, we have never seen anything like this. So it was more than a movie. It was just this extravaganza.
And I'd throw something back to, you know, Micheline, I'm sorry, I was having trouble reading the small print there. One of the things that I think is wonderful about what you've accomplished is, again, I came up in an era where the old movies, the 40s and 50s movies that I was watching in the 60s, were telling me that women basically, you know, kitchen, clean the house, that sort of thing. Barbara Brandon Croft, you know, she was a cartoonist in this, I think it was the 70s, 80s. Barbara, forgive me if I'm wrong on that. But there were Black female cartoonists in the 40s, but you don't hear about them. You know, you didn't know about that. And then in terms of television and films, you were victims. Women were victims constantly to be rescued until something happened in the late 60s, early 70s, and you got a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I mean, in terms of a Black female hero on TV, get Christy Love.
Yeah.
You know, that's one of the,
You know, I mean, it was actually, it was kind of a pivotal moment when I begged my mother to take me to see Hollywood Shuffle. And they do that rap at the end, and the woman says, I want, you know, I'm tired of playing hookers and hoes. I want much more sophisticated roles. And I was like, yeah, actually, now that you mention it, you don't really see that very much. And when you see it, you know, the other thing is I really am wanting to see more stories told by Black women, like telling their stories. And I was really glad that I came in touch with Regine Sawyer, because she's done so much work.
monster. Yes,
Bring us
great.
all together. She never says, she's a never say die kind of person. She's a fighter, and she's always trying to get, as well as Deidre Holman, getting women, you know, seen and getting them under the spotlight. And people are like, oh, you drew this? And it's like, yes, I did. You know, it's
Afua,
you know,
Ashley, yeah, all of them. You need,
yes.
just now to step up. But that wasn't there, you know, just not that many years ago.
Right.
And if I may, look at what we've got now, right? America Chavez, right? From Marvel Comics, right? Who, at least in an alternate universe, grows up to become the new Captain America. And even though she does not come full blown as a character with any specific Latinx identity, she's just kind of generally all purpose Latin, if you will. We know that she is, at least she kind of self-identifies perhaps as Boricua, because her first family in this universe in the Bronx is Puerto Rican. And so she kind of adopts that and then becomes Captain America in this one alternate universe, of course, becoming wonderfully appropriate, since Captain America's original costume is basically the Puerto Rican flag turned sideways, right? So in one sense, she becomes Captain Puerto Rico. But in terms of having a woman character, right, think about what that means as this kind of iconic central role within the Marvel universe. This is now what a woman is inhabiting, right, at least in that one version of it. So here's, you know, we're seeing it roll forward, and not just in terms of gender, but in terms of ethnicity as well, which is kind of cool.
And Don, I was going to ask you, as a academic, and you see like young people coming through all the time, and you mentioned that you use incognito, I believe, as a less like how how do these young people respond to literature in a different way when you present?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good, but it's going to be a long. It's an excellent question, and it's going to be a long answer. I'm sorry, and I want to step back by referring to something that Alex was saying earlier about those, mysterious indigenous Africans and what they are or what they should be. And I remember reading The Phantom, the comic strip in the Boston newspaper. Do we remember The Phantom is even still being published anywhere?
Lee Falk.
Lee Falk. Yeah. Indeed, right? So set in Africa, and I remember because I used to, because I couldn't afford comic books very much, I used to cut out comic strips in the newspapers, and I would color them to make them look like comic books, right? And without knowing anything except for the fact that this comic strip is set in Africa, I would color the Phantom's exposed face brown because he's African, right? Until the day that I found out, no, he's this white guy who is supposedly the kind of, top dude in West Africa. And that kind of idea, now to finally get back to incognito, is one of the things that I think makes graphic novels especially valuable in terms of all kinds of literacy in the classroom and beyond. Because if you take a look at it, and I mean, there are many places you can do it, but there's one scene, I don't know if our readers or viewers are familiar with it, but basically it is about a light-skinned journalist who travels down south to report on lynchings, much like Walter White did, right, the president of the NAACP. And because the entire graphic novel is in black and white, there is no pigmentation indicated in the art, right? And since he is light-skinned and he's dealing with a white woman and his brother who is dating this white woman, there are all these intersections, right, of race and ethnicity and who is what that you can't tell by relying on the standard cues of color. Or whatever the color artist is doing, right? With a nod there to what Micheline was saying earlier, right? So we have to find other ways to find cues. And when we read standard, just language-based textual literature, we know that literacy is a kind of game, right? We look for symbols, we look for analogies, we look for metaphor, we look for all these things that are going on beneath the surface. Graphic novels, of course, give us an extra level of doing that. And so it becomes a game for students who, without having to slog through what can sometimes be very heavy text, right? Hey, student, listen, you can either read the original Melville version of Moby Dick, or you can read a graphic novel of it, right? Which one you want to do? Almost without fail, they're going to say graphic novel. But there can be just as much that is implied that students can hunt for, right, in terms of developing a literacy in the visuals as there is in just the standard written text. And I turn to Kyle Baker, right? Kyle Baker's Nat Turner. I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but you should be. Or I think a lot of people should be, in which there is a scene, wordless panel or panels in which there are sharks in the ocean during the middle passage that are swimming around one of the slave ships. And there's this wonderful visual resonance between the triangular dorsal fin of the sharks and the triangular sails on the slave ships, right? Each of them representing this deadly force that is threatening the enslaved Africans, right? So students can find things like that and go, oh, wow. And all of a sudden, it's, I don't want to say easier, but I think students respond to things that they can identify visually as well as just kind of intellectually or through their textual interpretation, right? So it's just an extra level of things that can bring students and readers into a text because it gives them extra rewards. And when students are getting more rewards from reading, we all win. They certainly win, and I think society does as well. Wow. And I think, and I'm going to wrap this up here. It's just give me another minute. And I think in our contemporary society, where we are far more visual now than we have ever been, right? When we teach students to read visual cues, as specifically as we have historically taught them to read textual cues in a book or through literature, they become that more facile in reading textual cues. They're not just seeing people walking around, they're saying, oh, what is she saying when she's wearing that? What is he saying when he is exhibiting that kind of physical presence in the presence of somebody else, right? Look at that intimidation, right? We become far more visually, I think, acute when we learn how to read graphic novels, and therefore or thereby become more literate in the way that we read what's going on in the world around us. So there's a whole lot. I'm sorry for having kind of boosted that. But
that's okay. I mean, this is a conversation. We got to talk till 3:00, and we want to welcome Bill Foster.
Hey,
Who that? Who that?
Did he just hack in? Do we not have Norton's security going?
Okay. Okay. Listen, Bill, we glad you're here.
Muted.
You're muted, but that's on purpose.
Now you muted. You here, but you muted. We welcome you. This is Dr. Bill Foster for the people in the audience that are watching, who is our who brought together this panel, except I got Micheline because he didn't have no females up in here.
Professor, is there a teenager in there who can show you how to use your computer?
Oh, yeah, but he wouldn't take a quarter. What do I can do?
Oh.
Family, it's good to be here. I am so sorry I'm late. That's all I got to say. I'm sorry.
You're here, so let's keep the conversation going, bruh.
Fair enough. I was curious about something. Before there were quote unquote graphic novels, and what was it? Eisner, who had the official first one?
Will Eisner.
Eisner. Yeah, you had these.
Yep. Classic Illustrated. Yep.
Yeah, which one? And I'm sure I heard you mention it as well. That was my introduction to graphic storytelling, because I love to read, but when you had pictures with the words, and as much as they planned for the people who did classic Illustrator, said, let me write to the larger text, and I could stay with it. And then when I found out that some of my favorite stories are written by a brother, Three Musketeers, Man in the Iron Mask, I just said, whoa, because every once in a while they would include in the back a description of the author, and he was, and what he did when he's younger. And they said that basic things were based on his own life. And that just kind of took me away to the idea that you never know what you might discover. These gentlemen, Alex and Jerry, amazing work in graphic novels. So I've always been a fan of their work. That's actually how Alex and I met. I wrote him a fan letter and caught up with him one day. Jerry and I met in New Haven at a bookstore, and been fans of their work, and they truly give of themselves. It's not like we're riding a trend. They are creating a trend, and I love their work. I did want to say a word about Jerry's new kids, if he hadn't said something himself already.
You're a little late. We mentioned a whole lot of things, but that's okay.
It is real.
He's gonna keep up with that in. I get just a little pepper in my eyes. That's fine. Thank you, Santa. But the idea is that I like the idea that they're introducing themselves and to their characters to young people. That's the market that no one wants to, and we see more adults than we saw kids in these shows. We saw parents bringing their kids, and I think that's an important trend. I'm very fortunate. I got a chance to teach graphic novels on the college level and to do presentations to younger audiences at high school. I even took it to a senior citizen outing and talked about the comic strips that they remembered, and I didn't necessarily talk about that there weren't a lot of Black people in there, but they knew that already, so when I mentioned characters that I was fans of, they got it. Okay, it gives us a crossover that maybe education sometimes can't reach. But I think the personal touch absolutely does it. Okay, I'm sorry I missed your Don. I'm sorry I missed you talking about the Phantom, because I think we could have a lot of fun now. We'll have it later. Okay,
let's do it.
I'd like to ask Micheline though about talk to us a little bit about her books.
Please.
Because you got a few of them, sis. So let's give us a little outline.
You're muted.
My bad. The most recent one, no, it's not the most recent one, but the one that I started with in earnest was Malice in Ovenland, and it stars a young girl in Queens who's kind of feeling down because all of her friends are off doing cool stuff for the summer, and her mom has her doing chores and things like that. And through doing this huge list of chores while she's in the kitchen, she loses an earring in the oven, and she ends up noticing when she opens the door that it's actually a tunnel, and it sucks her in and down to this subterranean world that's populated by creatures that have built their entire evolution, their economy, everything off the greasy drippings and dribblings that have been coming down through the stove whenever her mom is cooking things. And so because her mother has changed to eating things that are a little more nutritious and steaming and different ways of cooking, their grease supply is kind of dwindling. It's running out. And they're actually very hostile to her upon her first entering the world. So like that's her about to clean the stove. And I like putting like little details, like she's got a steel wool holster and she's wearing a Lara Croft outfit, Kraftt. So she's kind of through trying to escape and get back to her apartment, she's finding out that she's making friends. She's learning to rely on her own sense of wit and wonder. And there's really no superpowers there. I wanted to create a character that was just very average, and the kids could kind of look at it and say, hey, you know, that's me. Like I could be that. I don't necessarily want kids crawling into ovens, of course. But kind of seeing themselves in the fantasy and in the adventure. I took a lot of things from my love of Saturday cartoons and my PlayStation 1 video game obsession and all kinds of stuff. I wanted it to be a very almost in the vein of Studio Ghibli, where children are dealing with serious things, but no one ever really is getting, of course, that's with the exclusion of Graveyard of the Fireflies, sorry about that, are having adventures, and they're being tested, and they're having to kind of rely on themselves. Diary of a Mad Black Werewolf is actually taken from the prompt word list from last year's Inktober, where they released 31 days of prompt words, and every day you make a drawing and you post it that relates to that particular word. So I took all 31 words and strung them all together into what is essentially a love letter to Black rage, and is a response to my feelings about things like police brutality, Karens who can't mind their damn business and want to escalate situations that are really not there and call the cops and endanger Black children and endanger Black men and Black women. All of these different things. Seneca Village from Central Park, I touch on that. And it's a way of kind of not only moving away from the child-friendly, like, hey, kids. I wanted to do something that was more graphic and much more violent. And it was, my favorite time of the year. It's October and Halloween, and monsters and werewolves are my favorite movie monster. And so I wanted to merge the two things. And it's a clan of women who live in New York City, and they're werewolves, and they go out. And one of the functions they serve is tracking down and hunting and killing and eating, literally consuming racist white people who attempt to harm Black people and brown people in various ways.
Wow.
That sounds like EC Comics to the max.
I've been trying to push it towards Monkey Paw Studios. I want Jordan Peele to pick it up. If you see this, Jordan Peele, please pick it up.
Yeah, I think you got a lead in on that. That was one of the things that I enjoyed about EC Comics, is that where there were critics always talking about, oh, this is horrible for kids, this is anti-Christian, this is not going to, anti-American. But the idea was, I read those like I was eating popcorn, and I always got something out of it. And the most important lesson I got out of it is, if you do wrong, wrong's coming back on you.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't even know. It's something I don't know if I would necessarily direct it towards younger kids, because it can be quite visceral, both literally and figuratively. There's quite a bit of gore and slimy chunks in there and things.
Slimy chunks.
But I feel like older kids, might gravitate to it. When I was a kid, I had I was lucky enough to have my own room growing up, and I had a little black and white TV, and Saturday and Sunday, I would actually go out and get the paper from my parents. I would get the New York Times and the Daily News, and the two things I would pull were the funnies from the Daily News and the little TV guide that would come with the Daily News, because it always had the lineup for Sunday, all the martial arts films and all the Godzilla films and all those crazy films and horror films. And I would watch them, and a lot of them, they would have Friday the 13th, they would have Tourist Trap, and these schlocky movies, Killer Grizzly and Gamera and stuff. And so that was my first exposure to actually like cinematic, gore and things like that. And I was
I
like,
wish we lived in the same
terrible.
neighborhood.
Wow. Yeah.
You sound like a ton of fun.
Well, come on. We all grew up in the same society where if all you do is take a second to examine the fairy tales we were told as kids, and you went screaming into the night,
Oh yeah, well you read the real Grimm's fairy tales, and they are not fairy tales.
Yes.
There's nothing fair about them.
Right. No.
I want to ask Micheline a question. At what point?
Oh, negative.
At what point did you start to really identify what kind of themes you wanted to explore? I mean, I assumed, and I know what that does to a person, but I assumed that you started out just expressing your art and whatever you wanted, whatever kind of stories you were telling. But when did you start to focus in?
That's tricky. I think I started, what was interesting is when I was doing the Anansi Kids comic, which I conveniently don't have a copy of right now, but when I started working on it, well, then I have to stand up. It was interesting to me because I wanted something that tied together. Like one of the things that I was always fascinated, I began like a love affair or reignited my love affair with anime back in the early 80s. And one thing I've noticed then and since then was that they have their, the folklore and the stories and the heroes is super, super homogenous, It's very concentrated. They have all of their lore there, all the gods and goddesses and the demons and the deities. And when I started doing a similar look, check for things that related to the culture that my mom is coming from, which is West Indian, it's very scattered, as one might expect. But at that time, I didn't really think about that. I was just kind of looking, and I was just saying, wow, this is really all over the place. And so I wanted a way to kind of try to distill it a little bit without making it super forced. So the Anansi stories are something that's from Africa, but they also have a West Indian twist. They have a Jamaican twist. You know what I'm saying? So it's also about kind of bringing it together, aggregating it, and making it my own. And that was something that I really wanted to do, not just for myself, but so kids could kind of look at that. And it's kind of an arrow that points a little bit back towards the past, a past that's more directed at them or many of them, some of them. With Malice in Ovenland, it was really more about wanting to have like a Saturday morning cartoon adventure. And one that was like, yes, this is a story that has Black people in a fantasy setting, and she's a girl, and she has thick glasses, because I had thick glasses, and my vision was and still is horrible. If the zombie apocalypse was to go down right now, I would truly be amongst the dead, the walking dead, because I wouldn't last very long. I wanted kids to feel that they could look at those stories and see their golden ticket to the adventures. You can be in these adventures too. And that also creates, I think, a very unique set of permissions in the minds of kids, like Alex was talking about, that it's a written invitation. Instead of being a +1 to that party, you have an invite that's sent directly to you, and it's in your mailbox, and it's you. And I want you to be there and see that there are Black and brown girls and boys who can write your own stories and adventures, and you can actually start thinking like that. You can be a part of those things, whether it's werewolves or ghosts, Jumbie, or an adventure of your own creation. I wanted to spark that desire and that awareness in kids.
I also wanted to add to that, because you were just talking about, again, the kids seeing themselves. I remember seeing one of the Star Wars films. It was the one with Lando Calrissian in it. And I remember thinking, so one of us made it to the future. Wow.
One.
Yeah.
And I mean,
one. Yeah.
when you look at like Tales of Ritzy,
it makes us feel so much better.
Yeah.
But so that effect was years later. I did two things. One, there's a science fiction book that I still haven't finished, the trilogy that I was working on, I was writing. And that has a whole bunch of different folks, backgrounds, Black, Latino, male, female, gay, straight, in it. And that was one thing I did. But the other thing that I think about is I do workshops with kids a lot. And for 8 years straight, once a year for 8 weeks, I would go to this elementary school in New Jersey and work with the 5th grade. So I work with like 60 to 80 kids over an 8-week period, teaching them the art of creating a comic strip. Right? And it would be, and I was insistent about this. No, I'm not going to tell you what to draw. No, I'm not going to tell you how many panels, except that you can only do 3 to 4 in a comic strip and get it clear enough. But the story is yours. And I would help them develop their own stories. Now, these are predominantly Black kids in this school. And so the first 2 or 3 years of doing this, again, back the same time every year for 8 weeks, the culminating event, bring the family. Families barely came the first few times. It's like, I ain't going out at night. So the kids are there, somebody drops them off. They get to celebrate what they accomplished, but the family isn't there to do that. But over the first 3 or 4 years, we cultivated the families. Get your butt in here. Let your child know that what they accomplished is worth something. Yeah. So that was one. But the real celebration was in the 4th year. Again, it was 5th grade every year. The 4th year, kids in the 8th grade, several of them came to us while we were there doing this and said, can we help? Can we volunteer? Can we work with the 4th grade? And, you know, we thought about it. I was open to it, but, you know, you had to work through the administrations. They finally gave the okay. About 3 or 4 kids came. And I said, well, you know, help the kids here with their drawing or whatever. It didn't ring in my head until I heard 1 or 2 children say to the younger ones, before I drew my own comic strip, I didn't know I could make up anything. I didn't know that my ideas would work. I did it, and you can do it too. That's and watching that peer support, we didn't ask them to come do that. They, of their own volition, their own desire, came to help someone else up. Yes. And then I was almost, you know, I'm going to go in the hallway and do, you know, I was celebrating inside and still trying to do the class and everything, but I'm going, oh God, you know. And just 2 years later, the administration and new principal didn't see the purpose in the program.
Of course.
You know, so what we do, what Jerry writes, what the professor does, both professors, you know, what we do has impact that we may not ever see, but we are blessed if we do. But it's definitely happening. It is definitely happening on a scale that's probably got some folks scared right now, which is why we're wrestling with some of the stuff we're wrestling with. But we got to keep at it.
Yes.
Thank you, Alex. May I add to that, my brother? Something that's always been fascinating to me and my family. Who needs your permission? Share that. Get out of here. In my family, I do the same thing with family legends. I'm the person that's been collecting the stories. I would sit and listen to my grandma or my mother or my aunt, and it's interesting how that gets translated. When somebody, well, where was Uncle such and such from? And I'm the guy who kept all the papers from the funerals and the weddings, and you give the people's names. So I had that information, but the same token, I wanted to know where these stories came from. When we were told to sit quiet in the house because it was thundering, lightning real loud, and turn all the lights off, and you know, I asked my students that over the years in college. I said, what did they tell you that was? Okay, what was lightning? What was thunder? And you get a sense of storytelling that's been going on for a long time, but nobody's been, you know, you kind of remember it, but you think you won't need it again. I think by saving those traditions, we are saving our own lives. We're bringing back a lot of stuff. When I ask people about my grandmother, yes, she did, made a poultice for something I had, you know. I said, I'm not wearing that. She said, I bet you will, you know. And the stuff that used to give us, it was just absolutely horrible. But the idea was that it told me something about my past. When their medicine, quote unquote medicine or trip to the doctor was not going to happen, you had to have something you believed in and something that it worked, kind of, you know. Chris Rock makes fun of that Robitussin thing, you know, but the idea was that we all had a sense of stuff, and we still hate that stuff, but we still remember it. And I think those traditions need to be saved as well.
Well, I think it's also cool that if you look at some of where medicine is going right now, many are going back to, okay, well, maybe those flowers that plant that particular group, maybe, because the synthetic stuff is wiping folks out. So sometimes we got full of ourselves for a while. And actually, to take this back to comics and storytelling, it is about the storytelling. It is about supporting and maintaining mythology, no matter what culture it comes from. It's definitely about that. I mean, I even talk in, whether it's a black group of kids or a mixed group of kids or all white, it doesn't matter to me. I talk about, the superhero icons that you're so in love with. Who created Superman? And they go, well, Jerry this and Joe that. I said, right. Now, do you know anything about them? No. Okay. So then I lay it out. Well, they were both Jewish, right? And they were firstborn Americans. So their families came from another country, which made them what? Immigrants. What's another word for immigrants? Aliens. Okay. All right. And what did they do? They created the what? The ultimate what? Alien. Right. And what did their family want to be when they came to America? What did they strive to be? Good Americans. What was the image of America? The beauty of the farm and the country and all this. It's, our society influences its artists at that time. And you can learn so much about where we were, where we're coming from, even where we're going by looking at the material that way. So I had them look at that. And I said, now, if you were to create something right now, your life experiences and the things you've been taught and shown will influence that work. So let's see what you create. And that's where I sort of take my students when I put them in. If you want to do a superhero, I'm not going to stop you. But you're going to have to add something of yourself to that story so that it is not just a retelling of the Flash.
I'm thinking about all the years we were at ECBAC and people would walk past and see black superheroes. And the adults would just have this strange thing that go over their face, like they couldn't conceive of the idea of a black person being a superhero. Oh, who's going to buy that? You, if you want to give your kid a point of view and include them in it, and that just was like always painful and sad. Always painful and sad.
Yeah, it was definitely a godsend to have things like events like that, because I would find myself at New York Comic Con and my wallet is still whimpering from how much money I had to kick out for the table. And meanwhile, I'm standing there like, hello, my baby. Hello, my honey.
You are a Warner Brother girl.
I was about to say another Bugs Bunny reference.
On stage group. We're going to be ready.
So, yeah, I'm so glad that there are events that do that really try to focus on and bring awareness to. And you see the parents come and they're experiencing for the first time with their kids a lot of times. And I really love that, especially like the Schomburg event and things.
But by the way, ECBAC, for folks listening, is the East Coast Black Age of Comics Convention. Just so you know what we were talking about in case you didn't.
Look it up online.
One reason why when I co-founded the Schomburg Black Comic Fest with Deirdre Holman and John Jennings and Jonathan Gales was to not only teach the authors and artists that the better we all do collectively, the better we do individually, and to kind of like not think of it in terms of being competitive, but was also to teach the fans what it's like to be a fan and how important it is to support. Because a lot of times they'll come through and say, oh, wow, this is great. But then, the kids will be like, oh, Mom, can I have that book? It's like, no, we got that free Archie book that we got from such and such convention. You know what I mean? Like, and it was really a matter of showing that, listen, this is also a business. And we need you to support us and to show the creators, okay, like maybe they'll buy Blackjack this week, but once they read it and see, wow, there are like really intelligent Black superheroes and Black stories, then look for something else. And they get Malice in Otherland, next month. And then they'll look for that and then they'll get New Kid. So it builds up everything. And, just also the, I remember one guy came to the Schomburg and he went on his Facebook page and he's like, yeah, I went there and there was all these like bootleg comic companies and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I don't normally light into people on Facebook, but and I'm like, dude, you missed the whole point. You know, not everything is Marvel or DC, you know, and sometimes those things get changed and written by people that have no idea who we really are. But when you come and support these indies, you know, this is right out of the head of Micheline Hess. This is not me saying this. This is not, you know, when I was doing New Kids saying, oh, well, you know, maybe the young kid should be in a gang, or, you know, he should be doing drugs or that kind of thing, you know.
And no father or mother. Yeah, right.
Right.
No father or mother, always having to do with hardship and being oppressed and things like that. Like, no doubt those things are occurring, have occurred, and are occurring. But why can't, you know, it's the fact that it's almost like a fantasy to envision just a kid living a regular life,
right,
you know, and living in a house and having their folks there. And, you know, it's still kind of blows me away a little bit.
Is it Don or Dan? I can't, again, tiny print.
Don.
John, I'm curious. You spoke very eloquently about how you can present certain concepts and make certain things available literacy-wise to your students. What's the feedback from the students what feedback from students that, you know, sticks with you or you remember or stands out?
I remember one in particular, a student, and he was an especially good student, though I'd like to think that others also have their own kind of personal revelations. But then when we read, again, Incognito at first, early in the semester when he saw it on the syllabus, being a serious English major, he scoffed. Like, what is Gagnon trying to do to us here? You know, is he trying to devalue the syllabus or devalue our study of literature by having us read a comic? And at the end of the semester, he came up and he said, you know, I found new ways to read by reading that. And this was a white student, and it was Incognito. So in addition to some other related comments about a kind of developing awareness of some African-American history, what struck me most was the fact that this, and I don't want to say arrogantly because he wasn't an arrogant person, but I think I think he found that there are always new ways to learn. Right, which kind of goes back then to some of what Jerry and Micheline have been saying about when, you know, people come up and they're like, you know, that's just bootleg stuff. That's not the real stuff. It's not DC or Marvel. It's like, listen, y'all got a lot to learn. DC and Marvel are where they are because they know how to make money, perhaps better than we have been able to do for ourselves, right? But that doesn't mean that they can necessarily tell stories better.
No,
they got some really good marketing departments. You know,
Deep pockets.
And deep pockets, absolutely right. So I don't know if I've responded in the direction you're looking at, Alex, but I think basically the fact that his eyes were open to the fact that there were not just new things to learn in terms of content, but new ways to learn via the graphic novel.
I think it's important for people like us who care to listen to the kids, to listen to the audience, especially. It's not about being a talking head. You know, for me in particular, I actually consider it a skill to shut up and listen, try and really hear what my students are saying. I teach screenwriting as a freelance gig. I teach screenwriting at the New York Film Academy. And the best benefit of that is the students come from all over the world. And even with COVID, you know, we're doing it virtually. So I'm talking to people who live in Mexico, Japan, you know, European countries, China, Russia, and listening to the stories they're trying to tell, listening to the experiences they have, informs me. And then being able to share stories of people, you know, in particular people of color, but being able to share stories and discuss these things and really hear those conversations opens up lines of communication. And as you were saying, Don, awareness, suddenly realizing, oh, there is something more to learn. And I think that's one of the benefits of the time period we're in, even though, you know, there seems to be a wide, thick wall of ignorance that we have to deal with. I think there's even more people finding doors through or climbing over or walking around that because they know, I'm sorry, this isn't all there is.
Right.
You know, you've been snowing me. I got to find out for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to be in a position to show,
Mm-hmm.
not only just to represent, but to teach, to show, to entertain, and to inform. I think that's our position. You know, as long as I'm breathing, that's certainly my position. When I stop breathing, it's going to be less fun.
But I think
for those of us,
encourage people to find their own way of getting into that as well. I had a white student who wrote his own ash can comic book. The name of it was Wigger. And he's a white student. And he was afraid to show it to anybody. I said, wait a minute, what's the story about? He said, this is what my white friends call me because I hang out with my black friends too. And he had, yeah, doesn't take a lot.
No. Really, that's the whole vocabulary in one sentence. Wow.
And I had to, I said,
school days.
And he felt comfortable enough to bring that to me in class and say, what do you think of this as a project? I said, I read it. You told a story about somebody who's trying to survive when he's getting pressure from somebody else about not being with somebody else. Okay. First rule in this class is that we all have a stake in this, whether people think they do or not. So you obviously trusted me enough to share it. Thank you. That was kicked to me by you, Don. Thank you, man.
A pleasure. Yeah, I mean, it really did. You know, Alex, you're speaking about listening to our students, and that's exactly why I then started injecting other graphic novels into other classes, because what that student said, what that student brought to our conversation as student and teacher, was the fact that this is something that is valuable from a student's point of view, rather than from the point of view of traditional pedagogy. So there it is. And in fact, I want to say something. Just last week in my African-American theater course, we finished discussing a play called Red Velvet, which is about Ira Aldridge.
Yeah. I
right?
I saw the production when it was here in New York, and I met the actor.
There you go, right, at St. Anne's, right? That production. Yeah, it's quite a play and quite a story. And so I'm thinking, and I was not aware of that graphic novel about Ira Aldridge. Excuse me, Sherlock Holmes. I'm sorry, was that yours or was that yours, Jerry?
Yeah, I'll actually, I'll make your life miserable. I'll send you a copy. I have a copy, a document. I'll send you the document.
Please do. In a sense, that kind of thing, if you will, validates a lot of what students are interested in, right? Because if it exists in pop culture, as opposed to simply literary culture, then that means, it has gotten a certain kind of approval from people that aren't just our professors, from the ones up there in the ivory towers, right? This stuff lives in pop culture. So, okay, I'll give it a shot. So, yeah. So thank you for that direction.
It's absolutely amazing when you hear, like, I've had so many Dr. Phil moments. I had a teacher come over, like literally with tears in her eyes, saying that she gave a copy of a book, one of my books, to a kid who literally read it and started crying, like sobbing, because he had never seen himself in a book before. And when you just see, at either the Schomburg or Alex's Kids Comic Con, or these kids just like with their eyes wide open, getting autographs and seeing books and taking them home, or like Micheline said, getting her book and running in the corner of a crowded room and sitting down to start reading it. It's just, that's why we do what we do.
I'll be honest, I had tears in my eyes the first time I saw Vibe also, but probably not for the same kind of valid reason.
I'm noticing the indication of the clock watching, and I'm just wondering, should we shut up and let you do? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to be quiet now and polite. And
I had a cough.
No, you don't have to be quiet. We have a few more minutes. This is very enriching conversation. Keep going.
Oh, okay. I didn't want to, be a problem. You can see we can talk.
Yeah.
We can definitely do that.
I'm going to just filibuster and take up the last 10 minutes with random thoughts.
Yeah. Take down my poster, man.
Do what they do at the end of a news interview. Could you, in 10 seconds, please wrap up the entire conversation we had?
Right, exactly.
I want to go back to Micheline.
Actually, there was one thing that I wanted to just to mention when we were talking about the fact that coming out with Black characters and stories and things like that should be the norm as opposed to the anomaly. I remember having a conversation with this guy on Facebook posting. I was commenting, and he was like, "Well, they do it. Blade was a good character," and I'm like, "Blade was like a while ago, and it wasn't necessarily something that could be considered suitable for younger children. But not only that is the kind of backlash that you see still like that's almost in a weird way become the norm when you see that there's like another black character in Star Wars, when you see that they've taken a character and made that character into a darker skinned character, the uproar you get from folks who at the same time have like, language coaching apps on their phone where they're learning Klingon or Elvish. And it's like, what's your problem? This is a person who's from your planet, like, why are you so bothered by that?
Just this week, Micheline, you're speaking to it. They just announced the actor who is in primary contention to play Hawkman in the Black Adam movie, African-American actor Aldous Hodge to play Hawkman, and people are losing their stuff all over the place, right? Now, never mind the fact that Hawkman has roots in Egypt, right? In North Africa.
Whichever origin you want to lock in on.
Exactly.
Because we still fighting with people to prove that Egypt is part of Africa.
Well, there you go. There you go.
But meanwhile, they'll do like The Last Samurai starring Tom Cruise.
Thank you.
Or was it the Great Wall one with Matt Damon and
yes, of course.
Kill Bill? So in Kill Bill, she can pick up a sword and literally kill every single ninja, shogun,
like trained since they were in utero. You know what I mean?
Everyone else just by herself.
Here's mine, and it has nothing to do with black folks, but I grew up watching some of the Charlie Chan movies, right? And there was a period in the 30s and 40s where it was extremely popular. It's played by Warner Orland, Sidney Toler, Roland Winters, J. Carrol Nash, and Peter Ustinov. None of those. Peter Ustinov in 1970. Yeah, in
all on YouTube as well.
None of those people are Chinese. And so that whole time period, I'm looking at it and I'm going, it's never been played by a Chinese actor. Well, I found out I was wrong. That back in the early 30s, they did a movie, which you didn't know until the last 10 minutes was based on a Charlie Chan novel, where Charlie Chan shows up for like 2 minutes and he's Chinese. He's actually a Chinese actor. But he had very few lines and very little to do with the story that we watched, which was abysmal. So, I mean, when you look at that, and then you look in the comics, and I know that when I started Blackjack, there was a lot of black characters starting to come forward, but there was also some Native American comics that were happening. That disappeared. And just prior to that, there were a lot of Hispanic characters starting to pop up. There was the White Tiger, there was El Diablo, there was a couple of others. That disappeared for a while. So it really becomes about creating material that says we, which is, there's no I in we are all here. And so when we tell stories, we tend to include people of color.
Yeah.
And then someone will say, well, if I've done books with white characters, I've even written Sherlock Holmes. People say, well, how could you write Tarzan or Sherlock Holmes? And, well, usually with my computer or pen and paper. And they look, but I said, but what? but what? For decades, whites were writing stories about other ethnicities, religions, genders. What's the diff?
Especially when you see how Charlie Chan is with black characters in those movies, it's like, wow, the hierarchy is made very clear. It's,
very much so, because even his children could be played by Chinese actors.
Yeah,
but not Charlie.
What were they thinking about?
And they still have more agency than the black characters too.
Yeah,
they did give Mantan Moreland some work.
Yeah. And he's so thankful for that. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Try again.
How old are you guys?
I warned you.
Hey, for those of us who grew up with talkies, can we talk about something a little bit more contemporary?
We don't have time.
There you go. That's right.
That's time.
Power.
Listen. Mm-hmm.
I want to say this, like, we have to continue this conversation. We have a bi-weekly podcast that I'm going to invite everyone back to so we can continue the conversation on our podcast. Okay.
Sure.
I want to express much gratitude to Bill Foster for contacting the men.
Body blow.
I like you, Effect.
What is that? Is it my birthday? I'm being spanked? What the?
You know, it's all in love. It's all in love, Bill. It's all in love.
I love my family. I love you all.
Like,
I'm so glad to
we got
meet
all
you.
men up in here. There's some sisters out here doing this.
Absolutely.
This is what the Elm City Lit Fest was created for. Like we in New England, and I call Connecticut Disconnecticut because they don't think there's black people doing anything up in here, and there's not a lot of celebration of the literature and literary artists of the African diaspora, and that is the mission of the Lit Fest, to celebrate and promote and bring awareness, not just for our people, but for all people, that African American, there are literary artists of the African diaspora, because we got dropped off everywhere, but we have talent wherever we are, and we get copied from our talent and all that good stuff too.
I like that we got dropped off everywhere. No, you can just stop here in the corner. That's the thing.
Well, we got.
I like that.
We were enslaved everywhere too.
I like that.
However you want to put it.
Yeah.
But we are connected. We are vital. Our arts are vital, and to support our art. That is the other thing. It is very key for me. And then I said this in the last segment. It is important for people to buy your publications, pay you to speak. Come on through. We have everyone's website listed on our website and in our Facebook page.
Thank you.
Thank you also to everyone who contributed to get Professor Foster's cable turned back on so he can get his internet.
Oh, you know what? Not helpful at all.
And join us for the rest of the.
I got from you guys.
It was looking hairy for a while, but thank you for that crowdsourcing.
These are my brothers. Look at that.
It's all in love. Much gratitude to you. I feel like I have a new set of friends here.
You do.
And
they won't go home either.
We'll be in touch. It's a good thing I have no food, because y'all.
Oh my God.
It's okay. We can take a plate home.
We know that relative there. Right? I got no food.
Thank you for having us.
We log out now. We have our next event happening, and I really appreciate you all making this a wonderful segment. It has been very enlightening, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you,
everyone.
Hasta luego.